Hi everyone, I hope this finds you doing well. I wanted to show a demo of the latest feature I've added to Illuminated Cloud, being a very tight integration with AER or Apex Execution Runtime. Now, if this is not something that you've heard of, it's a relatively recent project. You can even see the kind of coming soon banner up here, but it's generating a lot of excitement, including from me. I'm blown away by what this is and what it does. Exactly what it sounds like. It is a local execution environment for Apex. Traditionally to execute Apex, you have to send it over to the organization, your Salesforce organization, and it executes there. And while there's been a lot of talk about something like this, as long as I've been in the Salesforce development community, actually seeing one working in practice is like honestly, it's very impressive, very mind blowing. But a couple of qualifications on it. One, the coming soon does mean that this is not a fully released product yet. The developer October Swimmer and I were speaking, and we want to be very clear that this is really intended for kind of the early adopter type of user. I found it to be very robust, very stable, but it is missing support for certain namespaces, standard Apex namespaces, classes. I've also found a few kind of corner case SOCL query clauses and SOCL fine query clauses that it didn't support. Now, I also opened issues for those, and October Swimmer turned around fixes for those very, very quickly. They're very responsive and seem to turn around very high quality implementations of the respective features. Because again, this isn't just a parser for Apex, this is a runtime environment. So it actually has to have the correct library behavior, the correct query behavior. But there may be missing things for your project. And what I encourage you to do if you decide to play around with this is when you find those is log issues in the public issue tracker for AER so that they can be addressed not just for you, but for others who use those same features. And the second clarification is that this is going to be a commercial product. There is a license required to use it unencumbered, unconstrained. And there is a free tier. That free tier includes some, what you'd expect to be normal limitations for a tool like this. You can only run up to 100 tests in a single run. You're limited in the amount of time you can use the interactive debugger. And yes, I did just say interactive debugger. I think that you should probably take a look at the pricing, take a look at the free tier and the restrictions on that, and you can determine for yourself what makes sense. But what I want to show is the integration into Illuminated Cloud and how it will help right now with unit test execution and coverage review and analysis and interactive debugging, and then ideas I have on it for the future as well. Okay, now let's look at how you can install and configure AER in Illuminated Cloud. Now, before we do that, one thing I want to actually show as a baseline is in this project, one of my demo test projects for IC, I just ran all unit tests, and there are some kind of instrumented test failures here. But so it ran, 259 tests, 250 something tests, and IC always reports two different times. The API reported time, which was 18 seconds, that's what the Salesforce API said it took for all these tests to execute. And the actual time, basically the end user perceived time, the wall time, whatever you want to call it, which was about 33 seconds, almost 34 seconds, almost a 2x multiplier. And that's how long it took. Now, I've seen this particular set of tests take upwards of a minute, over a minute. Obviously, you're kind of at the whim of the org and the queue links there because async test execution like is required for running all the tests in a project go into a queue. This one happens to be quite efficient this morning, but I think it'll still help to prove the point. Excuse me. And there are failures and things like that. So obviously we could use features like rerun failed tests and such, and we'll look at how that manifests when you run with the AER. But I want to use this as a baseline. 33 seconds is the end user's perceived time. Salesforce said 18. Okay, let's take a look at how you can install and configure AER. So we're going to open up the Illuminated Cloud application level configuration. We're going to go to the Apex tab, and there's a new section, Apex Execution Runtime, AER. And you'll see it says that the AER executable is either not installed or it's not available through the system execution path. And so there's a link here that will help you to download it. So it'll take you to the latest build, scroll down, and for your OS architecture combination, you can download the correct build. I'm on Windows ARM64, and I actually already have this version here locally. For the purposes of this demo, I just moved it out of the way, so I'm not going to download it. I'm just going to go back over here. I'm going to move that back into place and just go ahead and close this and reopen the settings, and we should see that it now finds it, and it does. And it's available in the bin directory. And so it's going to be important that you put this in the dollar path, the percent path, the system execution path, such that the IDE can find it when it looks for the AAR executable. Once you have that, there are options for what level of integration exists. And these are basically the various executors for unit tests. Typical run executor, debug, which you can see is disabled right now. We'll talk about that in a moment, and run with coverage, in all cases using AER as the test runner. And the reason that debug is disabled, now you've seen in the past I use LSP for IJ for a lot of things, especially for free IDEs to provide quite nice support for things like TypeScript, JavaScript, CSS, as well as things like ESLint and StyleLint, but also for all IDEs for like SLDS Validator. So you probably already have this installed, but if you don't, you'll need to install it if you want to use AER for debugging, because it uses DAP, Debug Access Protocol. AER acts as a DAP server. LSP for IJ acts as a DAP client, adapting the Debug Access Protocol into the IDE's own debug framework. So we'll go ahead and install that if it wasn't already installed. So there's LSP for IJ. I'm going to install it, and then we're going to need to restart the IDE just to pick up that plugin being installed. So we'll do that, and when it comes back up, we should have access to the full set of settings, full configuration. So let's open up the application level config, and sure enough, there's no other prereq that needs to be installed. If you had AER in your system execution path, but you did not want Illuminated Cloud integrated with it, you would just uncheck all of these. My guess is if you have AER in the system execution path and you use Illuminated Cloud, you want the integration I'm about to demonstrate. So now let's look at what that actually does. All right, let's go ahead and close this. Now, what we would do if we were just running this all tests unit test run configuration in the org is I just press play here. Now, you notice that doesn't say with AER. That's not going to run it with AER. It's going to run it remotely in the organization. Debug is currently disabled. The reason it's disabled is we have selected a run configuration that's at 2 coarse grained scope. It is for all tests, and you can only debug a single unit test class or a single unit test method. So that's grayed out, and you also don't see debug all tests with AER because for the exact same reason. But you do see run all tests with AER, which is what we're going to do, and then you see run all tests with coverage in the organization and run all tests with coverage with AER. So let's go ahead and say run all tests with AER. No coverage right now. We'll circle back around, and what it's doing now is executing AER on the command line locally on the exact same machine that the IDE is installed on, telling it the exact test to run, outputting JSON. And so what we're going to see here in just a second, in fact, probably just a second or two, is that this is completed, and we'll see the times and we'll see what we have from it. Okay, remember that before the org reported about 18 seconds, but the actual end user perceived time is about 36. We're actually seeing that swapped here. We're seeing that it took 18 seconds from end user perceived time, but the tests themselves reported a total duration of 36 seconds, presumably because AER is running tests in parallel on the back end, and because it's getting efficiencies from parallel execution, the total end user perceived time, the wall time, was 18 seconds, about half of what we saw in the org. And this should be relatively stable because there are no local queues or anything like that. Assuming there's no other major CPU contention or anything like that, for the same tests being run, it should be about this amount of time. Whereas in the org, I've seen a variability from 36 seconds to multiple minutes for running this because of queues, because of contention for the same executors in the org, whatever it happens to be. So you should see pretty good efficiencies, especially if you're running tests repeatedly throughout the day. And I've seen this even more so. This was only, again, 250 something tests, even more so when you have thousands of tests and they take minutes or even tens of minutes, but they can take sub minute or just a small number of minutes when executed with AER locally. Looking at various test failures, you can see that they're all hyperlinked into the actual failure. I mentioned earlier that there's some forced test failures here. So you can go through those. You get all the same information. If it had a message in the assertion, then you can see the message. It uses the same type of formatting, so all that. But I will say that there, excuse me, are some failures here that did not occur in the org, and I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to explain what you can do to remedy that. So these two tests failed, and let's look at the line where they failed. They failed because they were selecting a profile, and it basically said that that profile didn't exist. It's the chatter-free user profile that this particular test fetches to verify unauthorized behavior for this authorization util. And in the org, that's always there. This test doesn't run with see all data. It's something you can rely on always being there. Excuse me. But AER uses its own local database, and that database is basically empty by default. But you can populate it. So let's go back over here and take a look. AER has options for example, bringing in setup data, or for making sure that additional packages you have installed, that the interfaces for those packages are available for resolution by AER at runtime when it's kind of knitting together what you have in your local project and its external dependencies. And you can bring all those in so that you can mimic your org, and you do that using command line options. So you've got this bootstrap information, and you've got packages, and you can also set your time zone. You can pretend that it's a different time by using like fake time. IC will automatically set up the namespace based on the current project, but there are quite a few things that you can do in order to simulate the actual org shape and contents, so that the local AER environment reflects that. And the way that you have Illuminated Cloud pick that up is if we go into the run configuration, you can see in addition to the org specific information, you can also specify additional AER command line options, one per line. If you pop this down, then you basically can put one per line, and it will execute with those. It'll add those to the command line that Illuminated Cloud's already using to execute tests for execution, for coverage, for debug, whatever it happens to be. So that's how you can actually specialize it to mimic your org. And I did not do that here, but that's how you would do that. Now, the other type of failure that you might see would be because AER, as we said, it is a pre-release product and doesn't have 100% support for all of the namespaces and all the classes, and there may still be some SOCL or SOCL clauses or even Apex grammar features that it just doesn't quite support yet. And if that's the case, then you will see that reported here. And again, what I would recommend is that you log that in the AER public issue tracker, and October Swimmer is remarkably responsive. Obviously, they're going to have to prioritize based on what is the highest value to the most users, but they obviously have a goal of having a completely replica environment for all intents and purposes locally, so that everybody's able to use this tool. So just report it to them. And that will not just benefit you, it'll benefit other users who use the same features and are finding them to be missing. Okay, so that's what it looks like when we execute tests. All the other kind of unit test features that Illuminated Cloud provides for org-based execution are applicable here. They're applicable here because the real difference is the test runner, but not the test features. So again, we can rerun failed tests. We can use dependence-based test profiles. We can run test suites if we want. So when these complete, let's go down here and I'll show you what it looks like to run a test suite. I can right click on this test suite and I can say run, and I can say more run debug. I can say run with AER, and it'll run that test suite with AER. If I want to run dependence of something, I can do that. So we'll let this one complete here locally, and then we'll go look at the next one. Of course, that just finished in whatever it was, 8 seconds. Let's go to, say, collection util. And let's go down to is not empty, and I'm going to say run dependence of this with AER. So if you remember, this was introduced, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago into Illuminated Cloud, some additional features for unit testing. If you've been modifying part of your logic and you only want to go and run the tests that ultimately route through that logic, you can do this. You can say run dependence, it'll get all the transitive dependence and only run those. If you want to have your test suite, let's go to the all tests run config. only take into account things that are changed relative to version control. It'll do that. It'll still get the transitive dependency graph and then get test dependence of that and only execute those. But it's a way of kind of slimming down the tests that must be executed based upon the things that have changed locally. All that still applies regardless of whether you're running in the org or if you're running using AER. So all these test features are still available with AER. It's just a matter of which runner is used. Okay, so I've kind of shown how running tests work at the test suite level. I've shown you how it works with all types of other ways of executing it for individual methods, for dependence of methods, for test suites, take into account version control. Let's take a look at coverage. So let's go back up here to our all test suite. Now, again, if I press play on this, it's going to do it remotely, so I have to come over here. I showed this earlier, so I'm going to say run all tests with coverage with AER. And it's going to go run all the tests exactly as it did before, but the difference is now that it is instrumenting for line hits, for coverage. So after it executes, it's going to output coverage information, and Illuminated Cloud is going to adapt that into what the IDE expects, just as it does with the information returned from the API when it's executed in the org. And here we have that coverage information, and we can see that coverage information is displayed everywhere that you'd expect. So for example, in collection util, we can see it over here in the gutter, and we can see lines that were covered or lines that were uncovered. This is a pretty heavily covered test. We can see it over here in the coverage view. We can see it over here in the project view for the individual classes, and we saw below triggers. We can see it rolled up through the directory structure. So it's visible in all those places just like you'd expect. But I am going to point out a couple of differences. So right now, the way that AER measures coverage and the way that the Salesforce organization measures coverage, there are a couple of differences. I've reported the ones that I've found to October Swimmer, and I think their goal is to make it so that the coverage metrics are reported identically with the org being the reference, but I'll show you an example where things would be different. So let's go to authorization util. Salesforce actually adds a coverage marker for method declarations on the name identifier, the name of the method, the line that has that, because it can be a multi-line declaration. It adds a coverage marker, and if this method is ever invoked, has to be a concrete method obviously, is ever invoked, then that gets a count. If it's not ever invoked, it doesn't get a count. But right now, AER is not reporting those as covered or uncovered. And so, for example, here is an example, something where no lines in the method were ever called, were ever actually hit, which means the method wasn't called, because it's impossible for this to be uncovered and the method to have been called, but the method is not being reported as uncovered. So I've told October Summer about that as a difference. And another one that I could find a class that has this, but Salesforce doesn't report coverage information about debug statements, system.debug statements, and AER currently is. So I think that's also going to be aligned, and there may be other ones. But the point is it should get to a point where the coverage that's being shown from AER execution isn't just directionally useful, but is actually identical to what you would get from the organization for the same execution, so that you can kind of keep doing your work locally until you're ready for that final step of packaging and needing to get your coverage there, or deploying into production, or whatever it happens to be. So there are some small differences there. Another one would have to do with the ability to see tests for a covering line. So in other words, this is a production line of code. The Salesforce organization based information provides line level detail. So this would be enabled. I could click on it and I could see all the unit tests that actually drove coverage of this line, and that information is not available in the coverage information coming from AER. I may let them know about that, and then if they want to add that, they can. But right now that information is not available, so you won't see that feature for AER based coverage. I don't even know how many people are using it, but I did integrate it because the information is there for org based coverage. But that's the way that you can get and use coverage information and some of the caveats of it right now. Okay, so the next use case is going to be interactive debugging. And again, I said interactive debugging. So why don't we go to collection util test, and we'll find an interesting test here. So how about test map by ID field. And we're going to go ahead and say that we want to debug it. I'm going to bring up the context action. So I'm going to use Alt-Enter. So on Windows and Linux, it'd be Alt-Enter. On Mac, it'd be Opt-Enter. This is a way of bringing up anything that applies to the current caret position. Hopefully people are using this all the time because it's useful for refactoring. It's useful for quick fixes and things like that. But it's also useful for doing integrated things like unit test execution, starting the LWC local dev server, whatever it happens to be. And we can see we can debug remotely. We can debug locally. We also see profile down here. I'll circle back around to that in a bit. You'll notice though that there's not a profile locally. I'll explain that. But right now I want to debug locally, and this is enabled now because I'm at the granularity of an individual test method. It would also be available at the test class level, but anything broader than that you can't debug. So I'm going to say debug collection test with AER, and I'm going to hit enter. And what it is doing is it is actually going to execute this test and stop at the first executable line of code and allow me to start stepping through it interactively. Now let's compare and contrast this real quick with the Apex Offline debugger. Now the Apex Offline debugger executes the test in the org to completion, gets the resulting log, which has been instrumented with a very high logging level. Illuminated Cloud helps you set that up, and that log contains enough information to follow the full trace of execution, the flow of actual execution, the stack frames. And Illuminated Cloud compiles that actually into stack frames, and then hands those off to the actual debugger and allows you to step through it as if you were stepping through that live active process, but it's not. It's already happened. And some of the limitations that go with that, as I think anybody that's used the offline debugger has experienced, one of them is that you can't make any changes. You can't set variable values. You can't evaluate live expressions because it's not a live process. You are limited in what you can see on variable values by the information in the log. So it will take every variable assignment and will update the variable in the variables view, but the variable value may be truncated. It may be kind of opaque, such that you don't get a very good view of it. Additionally, if something happens that changes the state of a variable by side effect, for example, calling a mutator on a collection, like right here, this list, when add is called, you don't see the collection update because there's not a new variable assignment being emitted in the log. That's something I've recommended to Salesforce, is we know what these methods are, certainly for collections, for set, map, list. If you just emit after any of these mutators are called a new variable assignment, it will change the experience of the log-based debugger. But regardless, you don't see those unless there's another assignment. So I think you get the idea, but this is a live debugger. AER is executing this locally and has suspended the execution of it, and we are now in here able to step through it. So I'm going to go ahead and step over, and we see a list was added as a local managers. It's empty. And now when add is called, we can see that the size just went to 1, and we can see that element. And I go back over, and we see the size just went to 2, and I can see the 2 elements. And I can step over, and now I'm here at insert managers. And of course, there are trigger handlers behind this, or triggers that we'll call trigger handlers. So I can step into that. Here's the trigger. It's going to call the trigger handler. And now I'm in that trigger handler, and I can see the various stack frames. Now, overall, you can do the same thing in the offline debugger because this information is still present, but just showing that you can still step into whatever logic was executed, even through DML. We can step out and step back out to the next line. And this is where things get interesting, is now I can actually start making changes. I can evaluate. Let's say something like managers.size. And I'm going to hit enter, and we can see that evaluated to 2. That's a live expression that it just evaluated and gave me the result. Now, you may have noticed that the code completion wasn't very good. The code completion here is in the context of an Apex source file. IC is actually giving completions, but it's not executing in the context of the current active line. It is executing in the context of this script right here. I have a shelved change list right now to make it so that it basically merges those. It's not complete yet, and it wasn't in good shape for this release. I'm going to try to get that so that it works, and so that expressions, when you type expressions here, you get all the completions and references and all that you would expect. But right now, it may not be perfect. It won't be perfect. But not only can we get information, but we can make changes. So let's take a look at this. Managers, the first one says do not call equal false. Let's say managers 0 dot do not call equals true, and I'm going to hit enter, and let's take a look here, and it just updated that to true. And why is that useful? Well, you haven't been able to do this in the offline debugger. So for those of you that's your primary contact point with debugging, you may not have used this elsewhere, but when I'm debugging things and I'm tracking down a bug and I start to really corner it and I go, you know what, if I change this state in this way, we'll avoid that bug. And I go ahead and do that in the debugger. And that allows me to proceed and verify that, basically my thoughts on that are correct, or if not, to see what needs to happen. And I'm doing it all right here without having to go through another edit, compile, test, debug cycle. And it allows me to just do that. And then once I understand what's going on, I can go make those changes, and then I can step back through and verify that those changes did in fact fix the bug. Or if they didn't, I can wash, rinse, repeat. But it reduces the number of those kind of broad cycles in order to get to a point where you've understood and fixed the bug. And so that's exceptionally useful. And the fact that you can now do that with Apex here locally is fantastic. Now, as far as making changes, one thing I will point out, I don't know if this is LSP for IJ's DAP support or if this is AER and its DAP support, but if I right click and say set value, it's disabled. It doesn't think that I can set values, but obviously I can via expressions. I'm going to log bugs against both LSP for IJ and AER, and whoever needs to fix it can fix it, but to make this so that you can just go and you can hit F2 and change the value right here. But obviously that feature still exists. You can still do it, and I can continue to step through. You can see all the values change. You can set breakpoints. You can run to cursor. I've noticed another bug with those. I'm going to log all these where it doesn't seem to do that reliably. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Like right there, it just finished it. It didn't run to cursor. But if I restart the process and say run to cursor, it'll work. I'll see who's responsible for whatever's going on there, and so that it gets fixed, and the debug experience is rock solid. But otherwise, you get the idea. Interactive debugger here locally. Don't have to have a debugger license on the org or anything like that, and you get past some of the restrictions of a log-based debugger. Now, there are other things that are missing that are present in the log-based debugger. For example, smart step into. If you're not familiar with that, let's say that you have like a builder pattern or a Fluent API where you chain a lot of different calls together in a single statement. Smart step into allows you to hit Shift F7, and it will show you all the things that will be called in the order that they would be called, and you can choose the one you want to step into. And so with like a Fluent API or a builder, you can say, I want to skip the first 4 steps because the issue is happening likely in the 5th step. I want to step into that one. Currently, this does not support it. It seems to be LSP for IJ doesn't support the DAP feature that's required. So I'm going to log an enhancement request there. I'm also going to go ahead and check and see with October Swimmer if AER supports it or not. And if not, I will go ahead and open an enhancement request there as well. So there's several of these I know about I'm going to report based on my own experimentation there. But this is how interactive debugging works. Absolutely fantastic. It's wonderful that this is available locally, and hopefully you can make use of it. Okay, so let's talk about profiling real quick. I mentioned we would get to that. So I don't have profiling integrated right now for AER, but it does support it. And I'm going to talk about why it's not integrated now and what I'm probably going to do in the future. But where profiling is integrated is I can go and I can say, well, I want to profile really anything that I execute that produces a log. And what it does is it executes that in the org with very, very high logging levels, what Illuminated Cloud calls either sampling or tracing. And then it gets a lot of counters out of that and a lot of additional cumulative profiling information from those logs, and it compiles all that from the log and makes it so that you can do drill down or roll up analysis of hotspots, of resource utilization, things like that. Well, it turns out that you can run AER for profiling. There are actually 2 args. I need to report this as well. There's -- profile that outputs goes pprof format, and there's -- trace that outputs Android's, I think it's Permetto JSON trace format. And those are both wonderful. The problem is that they're not supported in the JetBrains IDEs immediately because they are specific to Go and they are specific to Android development. Now you can install the Android plugin, and it may or may not open. I can't remember. You may have to go to the Permetto web-based UI, or if you have IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate, you can add the Go plugin and you can open the pprof file and you can take a look at them. But that's going to limit it to very few Illuminated Cloud users that are going to be able to use that profiling information. So I've already been speaking with October Swimmer about other potential profiling data formats. There are others from V8, from the JVM that are natively supported. I'm not sure that those will be as useful because they are very specific to the JVM, specifically HProf and Java Flight Recorder. But maybe the V8 format would work well and could be open. But see if there's another format that could potentially be output that more clients would be able to take advantage of. If and when that happens, and I've got something that I think can be opened by anybody, then you'll see a profile with AER and it will run it with profiling. It will grab that file and it will open it in that viewer, and you'll be able to go in and look at the profiling information, hotspots, flame views, things like that, flame charts. So we'll see where that goes. But hopefully that's something that will come about sooner rather than later so that you can also profile locally. I think the other question is AER's runtime, is the profiling information from it, how accurate is it, even directionally accurate? Directionally accurate is it versus the way things execute in the organization? I would hope and think that it's directionally accurate, even if it's not, numbers aren't going to be a perfect match. But we'll see where that goes. But that's profiling. That's why it's not there now, and it's where I hope for it to go in the future. So as far as some other thoughts on what I might do with this integration, it turns out that AER can also execute anonymous Apex scripts. I think I mentioned that earlier. And you can run it with for debugging. You may be able to run it for profiling as well, and maybe even for coverage. I'm not sure. But I may make it minimally for debugging and profiling once I support profiling as well, that you can run anonymous Apex scripts that way. I think a lot of anonymous Apex scripts are for actually doing something in the org. You want to inspect the information in the org. You want to do something in the org, actually insert some data or something like that. And obviously running it locally is not going to have that org-based side effect. But there are other times where you may want to verify some local behavior through like a static method entry point or something like that, and use a script, REPL style, to do that. And that's where I think it would be useful. So I'll look into that and see whether it makes sense to integrate it for anonymous Apex as well for local execution. We'll see. But otherwise, that's really it. That's what I wanted to show. Hopefully, this is exciting to you. It's certainly very exciting to me. I think that it's worth taking a look at how well this might work with your current projects, where again there are missing features, there are gaps with regard to the standard class library or grammar or whatever. Get those logged in the public issue tracker. It helps everybody. It helps October Swimmer know about things that people are using and how broadly they're being used, so that helps to prioritize implementation of those, because you can't just implement the entire Salesforce platform that's accessible from Apex, in all in one fell swoop. It needs to be a prioritized, constant move forward. But that helps to provide feedback from actual end users, and let me know about the integration. If you see any issues with the integration, let me know. If things aren't working the way that they should be, again, it may be something with LSP for IJ or something with AER. As I've already mentioned, I'm going to open some of my own enhancement requests and bugs there, but I'm certainly willing to have IC be the front line on that, and then I can help to disposition it and redirect you to another issue tracker if that's appropriate, just like I do with the CLI and just like I do with JetBrains. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Take care.